From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today, K-State's Jesse Poland will be with us to talk about new possibilities for improving wheat varieties. This on the strength of a major new grant from the USDA to the university. Also, from the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen is back, this time to talk about the care that parents need to take in making monetary gifts to adult children in the form of loans. Those have to be conducted properly to avoid incurring tax liability. Today's Kansas Wheat Harvest Update features Extension Agricultural Agents Justin Goodno of Barber County and Jeff Seiler of Sedgwick County. And standing by with another Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. That's what's coming up on this Agriculture Today.
For information on threatening weather, you should depend on the National Weather Service and their broadcast on NOAA Weather Radio. NOAA Weather Radio is an all-hazards radio network that provides up-to-the-minute weather information, including life-saving warnings anytime, day or night. NOAA Weather Radio also broadcasts information on man-made disasters, such as chemical spills, amber alerts, or other national emergencies. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. As always, it's good to have you tuned in. Well, here we're going to tell you about the next phase of wheat genetics research here at Kansas State University. And this will be on the strength of a just-announced $1 million grant from the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And the one who'll be handling this research is with us now. He is Jesse Poland. Jesse is an associate professor of plant pathology at K-State and, moreover, the director of the Wheat Genetics Resource Center and Industry University Cooperative Research Center at K-State. And those are the entities which are going to be handling this new grant funding. So, Jesse, congratulations on this award. And what it's about is continuing to develop diversity in our wheat genetics. Is that correct?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Yep, that's correct. We are actually fortunate. It's a combination of two different projects that are still closely related both in the same scope of focused on characterizing the genetic diversity in the Wheat Genetics Resource Center collection, and then trying to leverage and utilize this diversity for improved traits that we can transfer into Kansas wheat varieties.
Well, we want to talk about those two projects as they'll be working separately, but somewhat in tandem as well. But very generically here, why is diversity important to wheat development?
Yeah, exactly, especially for pests and diseases, and also think about hotter and drier climates. It's a real challenge to keep wheat crops resilient. And so you can think about the process of wheat breeding is obviously working well. We have much higher yielding, better quality wheat than we did 50 or 100 years ago. At the same time, that's a process of selecting the best genes that go into these new varieties. And so a continual challenge is as that genetic selection happens and the genetics are narrowed, it's a balancing act of improving yield, but also maintaining diversity for resistance to insects and pests, and also diversity for new challenges or even new quality parameters that we might want to look at in the future.
Well, let's examine more closely then the two projects. And the first will be studying further the genetics of a relative of our modern wheats, a wild wheat that you actually have had in store and have been looking at the Wheat Genetics Resource Center in the past. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. This one project is looking at genetic diversity in Aegilops speltoides, which is, if you saw the plant, it barely looks like wheat, much more looks like a wild prairie grass than it does a wheat plant. But it is a distant relative of wheat, and with it originating in the Fertile Crescent area has a huge diversity to pests and diseases, and with that has a lot of valuable traits that can be integrated into wheat. And so the main scope of this project then is to use genomics tools to really precisely and comprehensively characterize the diversity in this collection, and then work on some new methodologies, improved ways to track segments that we can introgress into wheat, and then speed up that overall process of transferring genetic diversity from this wild relative into wheat.
If folks prefer an easier name to say, it's known as wild emmer, correct?
Well, this is even another one that we're working on here. There's so many different species and different collections that we have. The wild emmer is a little bit closer relative than Speltoides. And then the domesticated form of that, emmer, was ancient, one of these kind of ancient grains. So it's a much closer relative to wheat, but still has a huge amount of diversity relative to some of the modern breeding. And so a similar project there is going to be looking specifically at disease resistance for stripe rust, for leaf rust, and for a number of other diseases, and trying to identify the actual genes that are conditioning resistance, and then using a very precision approach to move these in and track them as they're moved into wheat. This
is not K-State's first foray into this, of course. So how do these new grants help accelerate these efforts then, Jesse?
Yeah, absolutely. This definitely builds on like a really long legacy and a lot of resources. Obviously, you don't just overnight assemble a big collection of wild wheat relatives. And so this obviously builds on many decades of work by Dr. Bikram Gill and Vern Freeby and John Ropp, and over the years to assemble this really, really nice collection to provide the foundational resources for this. And then it also builds a lot on work that we've been doing in the IUCRC, this industry university collaboration, to kind of broad scope, take a quick pass characterization of the entire collection. And now with this new support from NEFA, able to really dig much deeper into two of those specific parts of the collection. And so, yeah, it really builds on a long legacy of assembling these materials. And now we can use new genomics tools to really dig much deeper into these resources that have been around for a long time.
We really should mention as well that the collaboration goes far beyond this campus's borders. You have international partners that'll be tied into this to help expedite the process, right?
Yeah, exactly. Specifically on this project with Emmer, this is led by the Two Blades Foundation, and have real interest in seeing these collections mobilized for wheat improvement, with collaborators in Minnesota and collaborators in the UK at John Ennis Center.
So the idea here is to diversify wheat and hopefully move that process along at an accelerated pace. How much can it be sped up, though, do you think? How much gain can be made here in as far as wheat development on the timeline?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just to give an example, like some of the new wheat breeding lines are using some resistance genes for wheat streak mosaic virus, so WSM1, and new lines are coming out with WSM3. Just to give perspective, these genes started out from another wild relative of wheat, Thinopyrum, and those genes were actually transferred, close to 2 decades ago. And so you can see that this is not just years, this is getting into decades of work to move something from a wild relative to now where it's being commercialized in wheat lines. And so the real goal obviously would be first to get this in less than a decade, and then even get it down to years of breeding time that we could actually move something from a wild relative using some genomics to very precisely track it, and then rapidly go into materials that can be incorporated to wheat varieties.
It'd be risky to pin down a year, of course.
Yeah, I don't think just from the limit on how fast we can grow plants. But if we could get it down to a few years, that would be a substantial gain.
And having said that, to that point, that makes this ultra important research in that very objective, because we're looking at providing improved wheat varieties for producers, for consumers, and a shorter time span means everything. And as far as the future of this crop, actually, Jesse.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the development time of bringing new things into wheat and bringing them to the market has really been a long, long term. So if we're able to do this much faster, you can also, obviously, that goes into much more rapid improvement of new wheat varieties.
So will the work commence immediately here? Is it underway?
Yeah, absolutely. This is stuff that we've even preparatory been preparing populations and things like this over the last few months and last year. So we're ready to go.
Excellent. Well, kudos to you and your team here at K-State and those beyond, again, the campus who will be collaborating on this as well for landing the grant, for launching this research into wild wheat relatives and what they can provide in the way of genetic diversity to our wheat crops of the future and the varieties that are turned out from K-State and other programs. Jesse, great news to hear. Thanks for giving us a quick roundup on what's happened here, and all the best of luck as you carry this forward. Appreciate your time.
Great, thank you.
He's Jesse Poland. Jesse, a wheat geneticist in the plant pathology department here at K-State, and also serving as the director of the Wheat Genetics Resource Center and Industry University Cooperative Research Center, both at Kansas State University. Those centers, the recipients of a sizable grant, nearly $1 million from the U.S. Department of Agriculture's National Institute of Food and Agriculture to support these two projects for improving the genetic diversity of wheat by mining into wild relatives of wheat for favorable genetic material, increasing disease resistance, stress tolerance, and yield potential. Of course, we'll keep tabs on the progress they make toward those ends as we visit with Jesse in the future. By the way, speaking of wheat, we will have today's Kansas wheat harvest update for you a little later on in the broadcast. But next, after this break, our regular segment on what's happening in the agricultural law arena from the Washburn University School of Law. Roger McEowen is standing by for that. This is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today continues now. It's our chance once more to visit with a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen, along with us once more. Roger, we're going to examine this time around something that's not at all uncommon when you see parents provide monetary gifts to their children, but for tax benefit purposes, they may be providing said gifts in the form of a loan. Of course, farm families will enter into this sort of thing routinely. You see it a lot, you say. But there are some pitfalls to this if one isn't careful about what they're doing. Talk about what sort of issue is at hand here, if you would.
Well, this is a big issue, Eric. I've seen this multiple times over the years and lots of cases on it. Where there are cases, obviously, there's probably more issues with family members doing this because not every case gets litigated. We only see just the tip of the iceberg on that. But the big question, as you framed it, is whether an advance of funds is a loan or a gift. And that classification makes a difference, a huge difference from a tax standpoint. And the IRS does approach this in a particular way, and I think it's helpful to know how they analyze this question. They presume that if you make an advance, that it's a gift when a transfer between family members is involved. So that's the starting point. They're going to presume that it's a gift. Now, you may or may not want that result, and you can overcome that presumption by showing that you've satisfied a number of factors that IRS looks at. One of those is that repayment was actually expected and that you actually intended to enforce the indebtedness. And when the IRS looks at that point, then there are other factors that they analyze to determine whether any particular advance amounts to a loan or a gift.
They want it to look like a loan and actually be a loan, so you get into such things as due dates for the loan, more or less the standard structure of a loan agreement, right?
Yeah. Did you sign a promissory note? That's going to be one question. Was interest charged? Was the collateral for the debt? Did you actually make payment? Was there a demand for repayment? Did that occur any time a payment was missed? Was there a fixed due date? Did the borrower or the child in this instance have the actual ability to repay the debt, or did they not? How did parents and child characterize the transaction? What did they say about it? What did they put down in writing? How was it reported for federal tax purposes? Those are the factors that IRS looks at. And basically, I think as you indicated here, it boils down to whether there's a bona fide debtor-creditor relationship in determining whether we have a loan or whether we have a gift.
Now, there have been cases in this area over the years that have lent clarity to this, and one from the year 1996 more or less spells this out pretty clearly, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that was a ranch case. It went to the tax court. It was a tax court decision in 96 where you had a married couple that operated a ranch, and they employed their two sons to manage it, and one of the boys also managed his parents' commercial property business in Georgia. And mom transferred $100,000 to his son by giving him two $50,000 checks, one in the summer and one in the fall of 1982. And she wrote the word loan on the check register and the check stub for each check, and the checks were recorded in an account labeled Notes Receivable S. Miller. That's the mother's name, and that's how she put it down in her general ledger account. What she was doing was trying to help him pay off a $56,000 mortgage on a house that he and a daughter-in-law had bought in 1980 for $300,000 that became due in 1982. Well, in the fall of '82, he used the $56,000 of that $100,000 that he received from mom to retire the mortgage, and he signed a non-interest-bearing note in the principal amount of $100,000 that was payable to mom. Well, that wasn't secured by collateral, and it specified that he was to pay his mom on demand or 3 years after it was executed if no demand was made. But mom didn't consider the 3-year later date to be a fixed date on which her son had to pay her, and she had no intention, the facts revealed, of actually demanding payment on that date or any date for that matter, and she never discussed with her son what the consequences would be if he failed to make payment. Well, in late '82, he makes a $15,000 payment on the note, but that's it. He didn't make any more payments on it. Mom never sought to enforce repayment. She would write a forgiveness letter to him each year. So she wrote him a letter and wrote on it forgiveness. And the IRS, this gets litigated. The IRS took the position based on those factors that we went through earlier that the loans were gifts, and the tax court agreed, which meant, and here's the kicker, mom has gift tax liability because she was over the amount that you could give to a child every year tax-free. She's over that present interest annual exclusion amount, so it's gift taxable. So that's one angle IRS can take, that it's a gift, and if it's an advance of funds that does have to be repaid back, then you can have other adverse tax consequences too. So IRS can get you one way or the other. The idea is to know what you're doing and properly classify it.
And once more, it needs to look like a loan to be a loan, and we'll talk about that further with a recent ruling, you say. This was out of a case in San Francisco. It's a rather involved estate case. It gets to the same result in the end, though, Roger.
Yeah, and here, a lot of parents, if they have multiple children, they have a desire to treat all their kids equally, or at least fairly, and that's another topic for another day. Equal doesn't necessarily mean fair. Fair doesn't necessarily mean equal, let me put it that way.
Right.
And that's an important point, particularly when we have in the farm sector on-farm and off-farm heirs. We don't want to just divide the pie up equally amongst all the kids, some of whom don't have an interest in continuing the farm or the ranch. But that's what she had here. She had 5 children, and her expressed desire was to treat them all equally upon her death. So she kept a personal record of advances that she had made to each child during life and any repayments that the child had made. And she treated the original advances as loans and forgave that so-called debt account of each child annually in the amount of the federal gift tax present interest annual exclusion. That's that $15,000 amount. At least that's what it is right now per child per year. And she and her spouse, so mom and dad, established a trust to hold some of their jointly owned property, and they had a substantial art collection and office building in San Francisco. And when she died, her 5 children were among the beneficiaries of the trust. Her oldest child ran up against some pretty difficult financial circumstances and entered into an agreement with the trust to use the trust property as security for $600,000 in bank loans. The son also owed the trust back rent from his architecture practice. Dad had been a pretty prominent architect, and the son was trying to follow in his footsteps. Didn't turn out as well for him. He failed to meet the loan obligations. The trust was liable in that instance for the bank loan. And then the decedent transfers over $1 million to the son, to her son, from 85 through 2007. He didn't make any repayments after 1988.
Wow.
And then she also had a revocable trust that she created in 1989, and that specifically excluded him from any distribution from her estate. So it looks to me like, okay, she's thinking that these are advances that he's not going to have to be paying back, so I'm not going to leave him anything in my estate. That's going to go to his siblings. And that trust was later amended to include a formula to account for loans made to the son during her lifetime. That's the way it was categorized. Well, when she dies, another son filed a federal estate tax return for the estate, and the IRS determined a deficiency of about $1.1 to $1.2 million, claiming that the advances to the oldest child were taxable gifts. They were not loans. And the tax court said, yeah, that's right, they were gifts. They went through that multi-factor analysis. And I think based on how I've described this, it seems to be pretty clear that these were gifts. There was no expectation of repayment. That was a key aspect to this. And she didn't have a reasonable expectation of repayment anyway because of the son's financial situation and his employment history. He couldn't pay her back. Yeah. And so not only did she not expect it, the son had no ability to pay her back. Those are gifts in that situation. And the estate, mom's estate, had a significant gift tax liability.
And the conclusion is that if a parent is intent upon providing this kind of assistance to their offspring in the form of a loan, as opposed to a taxable gift, they need to structure that precisely and carefully and make it legitimate to make it stand up.
Yeah, remember what those factors are that IRS looks at, and be very careful to document the transaction, write things down, because you don't want problems coming up with other family members. One of the most egregious situations that I see and I've experienced over the last 30 years in working with people on this are inter-family fights. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to have kids getting up in each other's business after the parents are gone over an issue such as this, as well as other issues. So be very careful when making loans or gifts to children, and document the transactions carefully. Make sure to structure it with those factors in mind that the IRS looks at in order to achieve the result that you want. Just be very, very careful on this. This is an area that's full of traps.
Roger, of course, has put together an article on this very topic in his blog, Are Advances to Children Loans or Gifts? By title. It's at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. As always, Roger, a pleasure. Thanks for the information. In 2 weeks, we'll talk once more.
Thank you, Eric.
He is Roger McEowen, Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, and along with us every other Wednesday here on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Agriculture Today is back now. Eric Atkinson here, and next for you, today's Kansas Wheat Harvest Update, as we're enlisting the good help of county and district extension agricultural agents from all around Kansas as they share their observations on harvest progress and results in their locations. And today we'll begin with a county which normally is one of the launching points for the harvest every summer. That would be Barber County in far south central Kansas, where Justin Goodno is the extension agricultural agent. And Justin, just how early did cutting commence in Barber County?
A couple weeks ago, some guys got in and got started. You know, right now, around the southern part of the county, Hazleton, Hartner, the Kiowa area, they're close to being done. They're 90%. is cut. When we're looking at the northern part of the county, they got a little later start. Looking at that Medicine Lodge, Isabel area, they're only about 2/3 of the way done so far.
But all in all, you should be able to wrap up this harvest, weather permitting now, in relatively short order within a week or so?
We hope so. We caught some rain last Thursday, then another good rain on Sunday, so it put things to a halt, but barring anything else, they should be able to get back after it and get everything wrapped up pretty quick.
So you're far enough along you can get a fairly decent read on the performance of the wheat crop in Barber County this year. So how would you rate it when you look at yields and test weights and the like?
It's been tremendous. We had a good read on it early, going out and doing some yield assessments. Actually thought our numbers were high when we were doing those assessments. Turns out we may not have been high enough. You know, when we look at southern Barber County, once again, Hazleton, Hartner, that Kiowa area, about the lowest we've been hearing of is 50 bushel, and it ranges all the way up into the 90s. We've had some guys that were really aggressive in their management this year that just phenomenal wheat. And not to take away from the northern part, we've had really good wheat up there too, in that Isabel, that Medicine Lodge area, kind of ranging from 50 to 70. Heck, on the test weights, been in the mid-60s throughout the county. And protein, probably averaging around 11. I mean, it's ranged from 7 to 14, but a pretty good average is around 11, maybe 12. But really good harvest.
When you say aggressive management, are you talking of fungicide use, heightened nutrient use, what?
Absolute, yeah, all of that. Mm-hmm. Some guys got aggressive with the N, as well as fungicide treatments, even insecticides. We were really blessed, for the most part in the county, that we only had one report of rust. When K-State was doing their reports, we were on the map, but that was only one single report, so we avoided that this year. We did have some reports of some smut up more towards the northern part of the county, and sounds like that kind of trickled up into Kingman and Reno County, but for the most part, we remained disease-free. You know, Eric, it was this has been an interesting wheat crop, because early on we turned off and got pretty dry, and it was pretty concerning. And we caught some timely rains, and some guys got aggressive in that management of their crop, and it paid off. You know, if we'd had this conversation earlier in the year, we'd be saying, "Boy, we don't think we're going to have much at all," and it really turned it around. Really good wheat harvest.
Rain does make a difference, after all. Justin, appreciate the input on what's been so far a quite successful wheat harvest in Barber County.
You bet. Thank you, Eric.
He's Justin Goodno, the Extension Agricultural Agent in Barber County, far south central Kansas. And next up on our wheat harvest report, we'll hear about progress to date in Sedgwick County, where Jeff Seiler is the Extension Agricultural Agent. So, Jeff, has progress been pretty brisk in as far as harvest down your way?
Yeah, definitely so. I would say we got started probably June 10th, June 11th on the southern end of the county. And up until last Friday, the 19th, they were speeding right along. I would say that we are probably about 65 to 70%. That rain hit Friday, and they were out of the fields for a couple of days, but I already saw someone trying to go again last night. So I think it all got soaked up because of how dry we were. So we should get going here pretty quick.
So then, with roughly 25 or 30% of the harvest left with open weather, if that is the case, you should be able to tie off this harvest within perhaps a week or so?
Yep, I would think that sometime next week we'd be finishing up. There were still some guys said they were waiting on some fields to get dry enough, but I would think that by the end of next week we would probably be pretty much wrapped up here.
So far as south central Kansas is concerned, we've been hearing some quite favorable reports on the harvest. Is it a similar story in Sedgwick County?
Yeah, it definitely is. I've been hearing yields from 50 bushels an acre all the way up to 90 bushels an acre. A lot of the guys that are talking to me are in between that 55 to 70 are probably most of what I've been hearing. I talked to a guy in the Clearwater Clonmel area. He's been farming for 50 years. He told me these are the best yields that he's ever had there. So
wow.
Definitely good yields.
That says volumes, and test weights then, assumedly, were pretty good as well.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard some fantastic ones. I know in our plots we had 62, 63-pound test weight.
So what was the difference maker for your producers in that location this year, Jeff?
Yeah, I think a big part of it was we had such a mild winter. We didn't have a ton of rain, but we did get some this winter. Those, not normal low temperatures allowed a bunch of tillering. And then especially, a huge factor is whenever we got into grain filling, back in May, we had that nice, cool, wet weather that led to some really good yields and some great test weights.
So no real complications, diseases were largely averted in your wheat?
We did have some disease. There was quite a bit of spraying going on. We had some septoria leaf spot, some tan spot, which, normally expect to stay in the lower canopy, but I did see it climbing up some in those fields that didn't get a fungicide. But even then, that field yielded 62 bushels per acre. So it was a factor, but it didn't do a ton of damage, I wouldn't think, unless maybe you had a real susceptible variety.
You must have a good group of content producers out there, it would sound.
Yep, I would say that the high majority of them are very satisfied with this harvest.
Jeff, thanks for the update right here.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.
Jeff Seiler with us. Jeff is the Extension Agricultural Agent, Sedgwick County. That is today's wheat harvest update for you. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so if you have a fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going in. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
It all looks like a giant clock as plants come into bloom.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
To see results of a good idea is satisfying. It can be a good stand of a new variety of wheat or beans, which promises a good, bountiful harvest. Or as I look forward to good tonnage of quality hay. We've done what we could. Now it is nature that takes over. For the hay to be good quality, I need the right warm and breezy weather. You need the same for harvesting the wheat. My son Ian, who drove up from McPherson, was surprised that in our area the wheat was still standing. Around where he lives, farmers had been in the field working like crazy to get the wheat in the bin. Always a good feeling. My feeling of satisfaction actually was more mundane. I walked the hill after a few days of cloudy and rainy weather. The sun came through. It was warming up. Earlier in the morning, I had been busy with the weed whacker and got things done. I cleared hard-to-get corners. I used a new blade. This blade with 4 wings worked well for what I needed to do. When I bought it, I selected it as I could sharpen this blade easy. Just like chains on chainsaws. If the blades are sharp, the work is much easier. Common sense. The satisfaction I felt walking the hill was because I saw many butterflies busy, flitting about. Not only butterflies, but also bees. All different kinds, butterflies and bees. Jacob, my grandson, had mowed the prairie hill before May 5th. For a while it looked very much like a clipped pasture, but that's not the intent these days. This horse is gone. I've turned it into a natural grass area with all the wild flowers which want to grow there. And there are many. Right now, the orange butterfly weeds are blooming, as are the brown-eyed Susans. There's yellow sweet clover, tall daisy fleabane, black Samson, and woolly verbena. I could not resist stooping over and touching the leaves of sensitive briar. And yes, slowly, the leaves closed. As the season goes forward, other flowers will bloom as the early ones fade. It's an ongoing process. Soon, I will watch the prairie grass grow. I'm waiting for the clump of tall blue stem to shoot up. It's a clump where a friend took a picture of Martin, my younger son, then a baby, and me. I carry Martin in a backpack, and his head sticks up slightly higher than mine. We walk the trail, and I stop near a mature, tall blue stem weaving in the breeze. I lean into it, and Martin tries to grab it. To help him, I hold the tall stem. He smiles. That grass was nearly 6 feet tall. It's growing on upland, much drier than our rich bottomland, where farmers grow wheat, corn, and beans. But I always watch that old clump of tall blue stem send up its shoots. The baby is now 43 years old. I cannot carry him anymore, and I don't need to. He's his own man. But it is a funny memory. The blue stem isn't tall yet. I know the hill has never been plowed. It was grazing pasture and native hay. The land is accommodating for butterflies to go through the 4 stages they need to go through for their life cycle. Those 4 stages are the egg, larva, pupa, and adult stage. The female butterfly selects the host plant on which to lay their eggs, and the larvae can eat, survive, and grow. Once the fertilized eggs are laid, they are on their own. When ready, the larvae emerge. Looking at the larva, you cannot imagine it ever was enclosed in the egg. Soon, the larva starts to eat. It will grow in stages, taking a break and transforming into a larger size, dropping the old skin. All that may take up to 6 weeks or less. When the larva has reached its full size, it stops eating. It now goes into pupa stage, which is the final stage before the butterfly emerges. When it emerges, its wings are folded and soft. The new butterfly pumps fluid into the veins, which then stretch out and elongate to form and support the wings. It takes some minutes for all to become hardened and strong enough for the butterfly to lift off. The delicate wings have tiny scales which hold color and reflect. There's much more to it than what I'm telling you here. It's fascinating to learn how its legs develop and function. For me, to have established a small piece of colorful prairie and see the many butterflies and other insects benefit from it is very satisfying. Not everyone can reclaim a small piece of prairie, but we can select and plant a butterfly garden on our premises. It all helps. Walking my hill and looking at the diversity of the prairie plants blooming and growing, it all looks like a giant timepiece as plants come into bloom. All one has to do is learn how to read the time and see what goes on.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. Our time is away for today. Tomorrow on the broadcast, we'll welcome in K-State beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff. We'll get into mitigating heat stress for cattle as we roll into the heart of summer very soon now. And we'll visit with K-State beef systems specialist Justin Wagner about drought preparedness for cow-calf producers and a special seminar on that topic that K-State will be putting on soon. And again, we'll have our next Kansas wheat harvest report for you. All of that and more tomorrow. Please rejoin us right here then. Meantime, Eric Atkinson here, bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.